In the Imperium of Man, power is not measured in strength or steel, but in obedience. The obedience to a dream too grand, a lie too bright, and a god-king who would shape eternity with blood. Legions could conquer galaxies, primarchs could bend destiny, but only a handful of warriors were ever deemed pure enough, disciplined enough, and terrifying enough to stand beside divinity itself. They were the honor guard, those whose loyalty did not waver under suns, whose courage did not bend beneath the gaze of demigods, whose hearts did not fracture under the weight of perfection. They were chosen not because they were the strongest, but because they were the ones who would never break, not in body, not in spirit, not even in the silent abyss of doubt where most souls crumble. And in the first age of the Imperium, when mankind crawled from the ashes of old night and sought mastery over the stars, the Emperor forged them not as soldiers, but as living pillars of his will. It was not pride that filled their veins, but duty, pure, merciless, consuming. To be named honor guard was not an ascension, it was a surrender of self, a surrender of fear, a surrender of everything that made a warrior human, until only purpose remained, burning like a second heart inside ceramite and gene-wrought bone. They were sculpted in labs beneath Terra's cradle, where lightning baptized flesh and belief was burned into marrow. Their first breath was devotion, their first word was oath, and their first lesson was simple: stand between mankind and extinction, even if mankind hates you for it. When lesser warriors trembled before primarchs, the honor guard stood tall, not out of arrogance, but because they knew something deeper, darker. To kneel too deeply before a god is to invite madness. So they learned to worship without worshipping, to obey without losing themselves, to see divinity up close and not drown in its light. They were guardians of perfection, custodians of destiny, men forged to stand on the knife edge of eternity and not blade. When they marched, worlds paused. When they swore oaths, stars felt smaller. When they drew their blades, war itself seemed insignificant beside their presence. For their armor did not shine to boast, they shone because they reflected the impossible expectations placed upon them. Their shields were not walls but vows, their weapons not steel but promises made real through violence and sacrifice. They were the first to advance and the last to retreat, for no honor guard ever leaves the side of the one they swore to protect, not until one of them stops breathing. And yet beneath their glory, beneath the reverence and awe, there lived a truth most dared not speak. Power forged in devotion always teeters on the brink of damnation. For what do you become when your life is not your own? When your duty demands perfection, when you are ordered to guard gods and sometimes to guard gods from themselves. It is here that their power lay, not in armor, not in genetic might, but in the terrifying, sacred strength of unwavering loyalty. They were the burning shield, the silent blade, the final breath that stands before death and whispers, "Not today." And as the Imperium gathered momentum, as the Great Crusade ignited like a wildfire across the stars, the first honor guard took their place at the Emperor's side, not as warriors seeking glory, but as witnesses to destiny's birth. They did not ask for honor, honor came to them like a burden. They did not ask for praise, their name was carved in silence. They did not seek immortality, yet history bowed to them regardless. For in a galaxy where gods walk and empires bleed, the greatest power belongs not to those who conquer, but to those who guard. And so began the first oath, a promise sealed not in triumph, but in quiet, merciless resolve, the kind that would echo through 10,000 years of war and sorrow, whispered by every honor guard who followed. Where my liege stands, I stand. Where he falls, I fall. And if the galaxy burns, it will burn behind me, never before him. Hook, what does a god do when the first crack appears in his perfection? A silence fell over the empire after the pyre burned low, a silence so vast that even suns seemed to dim beneath its sorrow. For while the 12 returned to their vigil, unblinking and unbroken, another figure, the one they lived and died to protect, stood alone beneath the weight of eternity. And though the galaxy saw only his golden radiance, His unstoppable march toward unity and order, something unseen shifted inside him, something small enough to be lost in creation, yet heavy enough to drown universes. Regret, he did not mourn the fallen warrior, mourning was for mortals, and he had long abandoned that frailty, but deep within, where only divinity could blade, a truth whispered like a thorn pressing into divine flesh. I made him wrong, not disloyal, not weak, wrong. For his design demanded obedience without hunger, devotion without desire, loyalty without yearning, yet in sculpting men into living oaths he had carved too deep, and now the stain of longing had marred his immaculate vision. He walked through the inner sanctum of his citadel, steps echoing like the tolling of celestial iron, eyes fixed not on the empire he was building, but on the flaw he could not unmake, humanity. It clung to his creations like rot beneath gold, like whispers in prayer, like a heartbeat refusing to die long after it should have stilled. The 12 knelt in their silent alcoves, motionless statues of armored reverence, but he could feel the tension beneath their stillness, a fear they dared not acknowledge. If one could fall to desire, could they? Perfection trembled, and in its trembling the emperor felt something colder than war, doubt. Was I wrong to make protectors capable of feeling at all? His vision, grand and merciless, required obedience that bordered on worship, yet worship, he now understood, birth's cracks where pride slips in like a serpent. So he sought to bury the flaw not in them, but in himself, for gods do not weep, they reshape the universe to silence pain. And in that hollow sanctum, where relics hummed with starlight and forgotten prayers clung to the marble like dust, he forged a decree in the furnace of his grief. There would be no more longing in his chosen, no memory, no desire. Only duty, faith sharpened into cruelty, love strangled into obedience. If humanity's heart beat too loudly in his masterpieces, then he would carve it out piece by fragile piece until nothing human remained. A god who fears imperfection becomes the most dangerous beast of all. So he summoned the genetics priests, the mind forgers, the flesh church architects whose hands shaped bone and soul alike, and his command came not as thunder, but as a whisper colder than the grave. Harden them further, new rites were invented, not rituals of honor but purging, memories scraped clean like rust from armor, emotions bled out like poison, names ground into dust, until the honor guard became less men than living monuments to obedience. Pillars that refused to crack because they no longer remembered how. And yet, even as he sealed their hearts behind walls of discipline and fire, he knew the truth no mortal could ever speak aloud. The fallen blade had not chosen corruption, he had chosen love. And love, in those crafted to worship duty alone, is the most dangerous heresy. So the emperor did not forgive him. He did not forgive the others. Most damning of all, he did not forgive himself. For gods who err must bleed in silence, lest the universe see the wound and hope to a ruler forging destiny from bone and flame is treason. He returned to his throne, the 12 rising with mechanical grace, but the air tasted different now, sharp like broken promise, heavy like breath held too long. The empire marched onward, yet the aftertaste of the pyre clung to him, a smoldering question neither sword nor science could silence. If loyalty can fracture under love, what force in creation might shatter me? And somewhere far beyond the throne, something answered. In the quiet between stars, where forgotten gods drift like ashes and ancient hungers dream beneath black nebulae, an echo stirred, a presence that fed not on power but on doubt, on the tiny fracture inside perfection's armor. It watched the emperor forge purity into cruelty, watched the honor guard become statues of faith sharpened into spears, and it smiled without lips, for now it knew the truth. If even gods cannot escape regret, then divinity can break, and the first crack in eternity had begun to spread. What the emperor feared most was never rebellion, it was memory. For empires are not undone by armies or demons or steel. No, the greatest empires fall to whispers, to longing, to the quiet ache of a heart that refuses to obey the laws of gods. And so, as the ashes of the fallen blade settled into the marrow of history, the sovereign commanded that emotion itself become forbidden scripture, a sin as grave as treason, for he had come to learn a terrible truth. The hardest wars are fought not upon battlefields, but within the bone and blood of loyal men. The honor guard, now 12, were reforged beneath ritual flame and silent prayer, their thoughts hammered flat, their souls pressed into moldstone so that not a glimmer of yearning might survive. Their minds became iron vaults, sealed tight against the treacherous pulse of feeling, and the world believed them statues once more, perfect, eternal, unshakable. But steel remembers heat, and wounds remember where they were cut. The pyre's glow still haunted their steps, an unspoken ghost that clung like frost to armor and oath alike. In their silence, a question pulsed like a heartbeat buried alive. What flaw lies in perfection if one of us broke? They did not speak, could not speak, but memory is a rebellious spark, and sparks burn worlds when fed by denial. The sovereign felt it too, the subtle shift, the invisible weight, the way the air around his throne tasted faintly of dread, like storm-touched incense. Though he had purged vulnerability from their flesh, he could not purge the reflection of his own doubt, and a thought gnawed at him with patient cruelty. If I fear their hearts, do I not fear my own? And fear in a god is prophecy. So he marched not with triumph but urgency, each conquest a frantic attempt to outrun a shadow that clung tighter with every victory. The galaxy trembled beneath his crusade, worlds fell, tyrants knelt, stars dimmed under the iron burden of unity, yet the silence of his honor guard weighed heavier than any throne. They did not falter, they did not think, they did not feel, but every step they took felt like walking on bones that had once belonged to faith. Something was stirring in them, not rebellion, but the memory of a man who dared hope to be seen. And in their stillness, a new terror was born, the terror of emptiness. For what is loyalty if not fueled by belief? What is duty if it is hollow? They had not lost their devotion, they had lost themselves. And the void left behind was hungry. A heart that has forgotten how to feel does not become safe, it becomes unpredictable. For one cannot kill emotion, only bury it deep enough that when it claws free, it does so as something monstrous. And in those perfect warriors, emotion had begun to rot, fermenting into something cold and alien, a loyalty stripped of warmth and sharpened into fanatic blade edge. They no longer loved their sovereign. They worshipped him the way tombstones worship death, silently, eternally, without life. And the sovereign, in his eternal wisdom, felt this shift and feared not treason, but inevitability. He had killed love to protect loyalty, but in doing so, he had created devotion without anchor, faith without soul, obedience without mercy. This was not loyalty. This was void-bound worship, capable of splitting galaxies in two in his name, or tearing heavens apart if commanded. Emotion, denied, had grown teeth. It sat coiled in the marrow of giants, waiting for a single fracture to erupt with the fury of forgotten humanity. Thus began the era of silent guardianship, where the honor guard stood like statues carved from the absence of hope. They followed every command, crushed every foe, erased every threat with the precision of fate wearing armor. Yet as worlds bowed and banners fell, a whisper followed them across time and space, a whisper first birthed in one dying soldier's final plea, "See me." And though none spoke it aloud, the 12 heard it in every victory and every scream, a memory like a splinter beneath sacred bone. What is a god who cannot look upon his own creations without seeing failure? What are protectors who cannot protect themselves from the wound of remembrance? The fallen blade had not shattered loyalty, he had exposed its fragility. And in doing so, he left behind a curse more lethal than betrayal, the knowledge that even divine purpose can ache, and where wounds ache, corruption listens. Beyond the reach of the sovereign's light, where forgotten stars drown in eternal night, something watched, a presence made not of flesh or shadow, but of hunger shaped like thought. It had tasted doubt in the emperor's heart and despair in his chosen, and it drifted closer, unseen and patient, for nothing feeds the dark quite like sanctity suffocating itself. The honor guard stood unbroken, yet every oath, every step, every breath carried the echo of a man who dared to want, and want is the birthplace of ruin. Somewhere in the silent chambers of fate, a cosmic truth unfurled like a wound across heaven. When emotion is forbidden, it does not die, it waits. Hook, silence protects kingdoms, but silence also breeds ghosts. Night came slowly to the imperial citadel, though in truth night had no meaning there. Light and darkness obeyed the sovereign's will, not the heavens turning. Yet still the halls dimmed, torches drawing long breathless shadows across sacred stone, pillars rising like frozen prayers to a god who feared remembering. In that hush, where mortal footsteps did not dare echo and the galaxy's wars paused beyond walls of gold and judgment, the honor guard entered their rest. Not sleep, they were denied such mercy, but stillness, that terrible imitation of peace meant to preserve obedience. Armor cooled, joints stilled, their helms faced forward, ever vigilant, ever empty. But in the place where thought should not live, something stirred, a whisper like dust sliding over tombstone marble, gentle as a lover's sigh and cold as the void. It did not come from outside. No enemy breached the sanctum. No traitor dared breathe treason. It rose from memory's grave, from ash still clinging to the edges of soul and steel. And the whisper spoke only one word, carried on the breath of a warrior who once dared to want. Brother, the 12 did not move, they did not react. Yet somewhere inside those engineered titans, nerves trembled like strings plucked by fate's unseen hand. Dreams were forbidden, feelings outlawed, memory cauterized at the root, and yet in the dark, something ancient and human clawed upward, bloody and desperate, fighting to be felt. It began not as vision but sensation, the heat of a pyre, the weight of kneeling, the ache of longing, a voice without lungs calling across eternity. The 12 did not remember the blade who knelt. They were not allowed to, yet they felt him. A pressure behind the eyes, a phantom ache in bones reinforced beyond mortality, a heartbeat echoing from a heart that no longer existed. They stood like statues, but statues do not tremble inside. It was not grief. They had no grief left. It was not sorrow. Sorrow requires a heart, and theirs had been sanctified into obedience. No, what crawled through their veins was something older, something sacred and cursed in equal measure, recognition. And recognition is the first spark of rebellion against oblivion. Even gods cannot kill the memory of pain. Far above them, in chambers gilded with triumph and regret, the sovereign felt a ripple through the psychic sea, faint yet unmistakable, like the flutter of a wounded wing against the bars of destiny's cage. His hand paused above a star map pulsing with future wars. His gaze narrowed. For a fraction of a divine second, his breath stilled. Then came the sensation, soft as prayer, sharp as betrayal, the feeling of something long buried stirring in his perfect warriors. Emotion smothered but not slain, the embers of humanity glowing beneath layers of engineered obedience, and beneath that a voice not his own, the fallen blade calling through death, not in defiance but in longing. The sovereign's jaw tightened, the chamber seeming to tremble around him as if reality itself recoiled from his unease. He had crafted champions without self, pillars without cracks, faith without question, and yet here it was. The proof that memory cannot be burned clean, only made silent until it finds new breath in the quiet. His greatest creation had begun remembering what it was designed to forget. The universe held its breath, for even prophecy fears the moment when the past claws its way back into the minds of those who were never meant to remember it. Below, the first honor guard's fingers twitched, so slight a movement it could have been a trick of light, so slight that only eternity itself noticed. In their vision, though they had no vision, came the pyre, roaring not as punishment but as lament. They saw not fire, but a man kneeling in it, face hidden behind ruined armor, head bowed not in failure but in love, that forbidden word, that sacred sin. A voice familiar as breathing whispered not to be heard but to be felt, "I did not fall, I chose." The words hit like impact, like faith breaking open inside them, not treason, not weakness, choice. A concept more dangerous than any enemy blade, for choice births doubt, and doubt births humanity, and humanity, once awakened, never sleeps again. And the first tear in eternity had begun to bleed. The sovereign turned, cloak whispering like judgment's breath, eyes burning with the fury of a god who sees fate slipping from his grasp. The honor guard remained still, yet beneath their armor a storm brewed, silent, inevitable, sacred in its tragedy. No rebellion had begun, no word was spoken, but something worse than rebellion stirred, the return of self. The pyre had not cleansed the flaw, it had baptized it, and across the vast gulf of creation, unseen and smiling, a shadow leaned forward, savoring the moment perfection, remembered pain. For when the dead speak in dreams, the living soon learn to listen. The most terrifying enemy is not the traitor, it's the thought that a loyal heart might change. Dawn rose hollow and bloodless over the citadel of eternity, though no true sun touched its spires. Light there came not from stars, but from the sovereign's will alone, a pale radiance that washed the world like judgment made flesh. The honor guard, 12 silent titans, stirred in their sanctified alcoves, armor humming with machine sacrament, visors igniting with cold, surgical purpose. They rose not as men awaken, but as weapons deploy precise, hollow bound. Yet beneath that steel obedience, something fragile beat like a trapped bird seeking cracks in its cage. They felt unease, not danger. They did not fear the blade, they feared memory. For deep within, beneath wires, beneath oath blood and sanctified marrow, a whisper coiled like smoke, a name without sound, a face half burned in their souls, a kneeling figure in fire who had loved too deeply. They did not remember him, but they remembered the ache his absence left behind. The emperor watched them from his high throne, golden and terrible, a god whose heart bore a wound the universe dared not name. His gaze moved across the 12 like a blade drawn across silk, searching for weakness not with suspicion, but with grief sharpened into ruthlessness. Perfection cracked once, his silence screamed, it will not crack again. And so the day began not with orders or hymns, but with dread disguised as duty, a kingdom holding breath beneath the weight of a forgotten man's last longing. Across marble floors veined like frozen lightning, the honor guard marched in unison, yet not perfectly. Subtle fractures imperceptible to mortal eyes marked their rhythm, a fraction too slow, a step too heavy, a breath drawn as though lungs remembered fear. One among them, a giant whose presence once brought solace to entire worlds, felt a tremor travel the length of his spine, not of weakness, but of knowing. Knowing that something ancient and forbidden had awoken within them, something neither enemy nor ally, but a truth long buried. They had once been more than instruments. Once they had felt the warmth of pride, the sting of devotion, the hollow hunger for acknowledgement. Now those sensations returned like ghosts touching scar tissue, soft and devastating. In the hall of eternal oaths, where banners of fallen galaxies hung like funeral cloth and statues of forgotten martyrs stared unblinking into eternity, they knelt before the sovereign as they had 1,000 times. But kneeling now hurt, not the body. Pain meant nothing to flesh reforged, but the soul, that fragile ember they believed extinguished. And as their armored forms bowed, steel groaning, hearts silent, one thought rippled through the chamber like a forbidden prayer. What if loyalty could fracture again? The moment a weapon wonders what it is, it forgets what it was made to destroy. In that instant the sovereign felt it, not rebellion, no blade turned against him, but uncertainty, that most insidious poison. His fingers tightened on the armrest of his throne, and reality trembled, air warping with divine fury barely chained. For gods do not fear armies, they fear awakening in the hearts they once commanded. His voice, when it came, rolled like thunder forged from sorrow and command, stand, and they did, but not in perfect unison, a heartbeat's difference, a fracture the universe could feel. Silence followed, thick as oil, heavy as prophecy. He searched their visors, seeking to crush the spark before it birthed flame. And in their mirrored gold he saw his greatest triumph staring back, and in its depths the echo of his greatest failure. for they did not stand because he willed it. They stood because they remembered they once had stood beside him not only in duty, but in faith. That memory, faint as dying starlight, threatened to reshape destiny itself. They did not speak, they did not move, but their stillness trembled with unspoken truth. Loyalty without heart is brittle, and brittle things break, and in that quivering silence, loyalty looked at itself and flinched. The sovereign's eyes dimmed, not in weakness, but in sorrow deep enough to drown galaxies. He understood then the fallen blade had not died alone. A part of every honor guard burned with him still, buried in ash and denial, and that ember, small, fragile, sacred, had begun to breathe. No alarms sounded. No swords were drawn, yet in the vaults of fate chains creaked. Something ancient smiled in the dark between stars, and in the halls of gods a truth settled like a blade against the throat of creation. Weapons are obedient. Souls are not. It began not with war, nor rebellion, nor blood spilled in sacred halls. No, fate is crueler than that. It began with a sound so small it could have been mistaken for wind in forgotten cathedrals. A breath shuddering inside armor that was never meant to breathe at all. The honor guard stood at their posts, motionless as monuments carved from judgment, yet within one, just one, something shifted, something ancient and unbearably human. A pulse that did not belong to the gene-steel perfection of engineered flesh, but to memory, fragile and treacherous. He remembered, not clearly, not fully, but like a dream bleeding into waking, a battlefield drowned in firelight. A hand on his shoulder, heavier than worlds, lighter than mercy, a voice not of command but of belief. Stand with me. The simplest words, yet they had reshaped galaxies, born legions, burned empires into dust. And for just one heartbeat, his knees trembled, not from strain, but from loss. The others felt it ripple through the sanctified silence like a tremor before a quake, though none dared move. The citadel's marble veins glowed under the holy light leaking from reality itself, and statues of fallen heroes watched with stone pity as steel hearts tried to recall how to break. For weapons are not meant to mourn. Weapons do not ache, but he did. He felt a hollow inside him where purpose once burned like a star, now echoing like a tomb. A servo flexed, a gauntlet twitched. A single grain of gold dust mortar slid from an armored knee and kissed the floor like the first tear shed by a god. And in that microscopic motion, destiny shivered. The sacred machine spirits in his armor hissed warnings like wounded serpents, loyalty parameters destabilizing, identity breach detected, emotional anomaly. Yet he did not fall to corruption or madness. He fell to something far more dangerous, remembrance. He had sworn never to doubt, never to feel, never to recall anything but orders carved into his marrow like scripture. But memory ignores law. Memory is rebellion disguised as devotion, and the moment he remembered the fallen blade, not as a traitor but as a brother, the universe tilted. He turned his head, just slightly, just enough that the others felt it like a scream in the heart. His visor shifted from perfect stillness to searching, as though hunting for something just beyond mortal sight, a face, a ghost, a chance to undo eternity. The sovereign felt it across the cosmos, his divine consciousness brushing against the guard like a storm wind bracing against mountains. Not anger, anger is loud, this was quieter, infinitely heavier, fear shaped like grief. The emperor feared corruption, yes, but deeper than that, he feared the past he had killed in his own name. He feared love, for love had once undone him. The guard beside the trembling one spoke in a voice that was not a voice, a vibration of oath runes in their shared neural lattice. Remembering is forbidden. A pause, a heartbeat suspended on the knife edge of destiny. Then a reply soft as prayer, sharp as betrayal. Forgetting is a wound. The words should not have been possible. Their tongues were built for commands, not confession. Yet there it was, truth breathed aloud in a place where truth should not exist. Machine spirits keened, warplight flickered, and somewhere in the unseen depths of the citadel, the statues of past honor guard felt dust settle heavy upon them, as if mourning. This was not treason. This was the first crack in perfection. And cracks do not stay small, they grow, they spider, they split mountains, they swallow empires whole. For once a weapon realizes it has a past, it will soon wonder if it deserves a future. A man does not fall when he remembers pain. He falls when he remembers why he once endured it. There are moments not recorded in scripture, not etched into the marble bones of imperial cathedrals, where even gods avert their gaze, not because they are powerless, but because they fear what they will see. In the high sanctum where reality bowed like a chained hound, the emperor, he who commands stars, he who silences gods, paused, not in stride nor in command, but in heart, and that was the first sign something terrible was coming. The galaxy roared with war, empires died screaming, faith was forged from blood and prophecy. Yet here, in a chamber where eternity breathed and stars flickered like trembling candles, the emperor turned not toward the battlefield, but away. Away from the honor guard who wavered, away from the echo of memory whispering treasonous humanity into perfect steel, away from the truth he himself buried beneath golden crowns and burning glory. For a god who builds perfection cannot bear to watch it remember it was once human. His gaze drifted not to armies nor fleets, but to shadows only he could see, shadows shaped like suns, each one a future tragedy, each one a lesson carved in betrayal. In his silence galaxies trembled, the throne beneath his hand pulsed with psychic fire, chains of light binding the warp itself, but his fingers did not tighten. They trembled just once, a microquake against the surface of divinity. And those who stood watch, forged to sense only blasphemy and threat, felt something unprecedented drip from the throne like liquid gold. Sorrow, the weight of regret from a being who could unmake suns yet could not resurrect trust. Far below, the honor guard still held their vigil, unaware they had been abandoned for a single heartbeat by the god they would die for without question. Their minds, locked in duty, sculpted for obedience, felt a ripple like morning traveling through the psychic wards. Not fear, something crueler, the knowledge that perfection is seen, judged, and found wanting. In that instant the emperor saw futures, a brother falling to ambition, another to zealotry, another to despair. He saw worlds burning not because mankind failed him, but because he made men who could. And the cruelest vision of all, he saw the honor guard broken not by war, but by loyalty that asked too much, gave too little, and left them hollow beneath the armor. He shut his eyes, that alone was omen enough to damn centuries. For when gods close their eyes, the universe dreams of ruin. A whisper, soft as dead leaves moving across graves, slid from his lips, words too small for creation, too large for forgiveness. Not again, the golden throne shuddered. Seraph machines screamed hymns that blistered stone. The warp recoiled like a wounded beast, and from corridors light had never touched came a sound like steel weeping. The emperor did not turn back. He could not. To look again would mean acknowledging flaw not in his sons nor his empire, but in himself. So he walked deeper into the storm of futures, choosing war over reflection, immortality over truth, command over confession. For even gods run from their ghosts, and below the honor guard felt the silence he left behind. Not abandonment, they were too conditioned for that, but something subtler, heavier, duty without warmth, faith without witness. Loyalty offered to a master who, for the first time since time knelt, could not bear to look. In that silence, a truth bloomed poisonous and radiant. A god who cannot face his chosen is no longer a god, only a king afraid of his throne. And what is loyalty when the one you serve cannot look at you? Failure in the Imperium is not spoken, it is buried, beneath marble, myth, and the bones of those who dared to falter. Yet there was a day, carved in silence rather than stone, when failure was not swallowed, but borne screaming into the galaxy like a dying star's last curse. It was not a battlefield where banners burned and saints bled. It was not in sight of demon or Xenos, nor beneath the roar of a war choir. It happened in a place far quieter, far crueler, a corridor of impossible light that hummed with purpose older than humanity's memory. The honor guard marched, eternal and unquestioning, until a single step faltered. No wound, no enemy, just hesitation, a flicker in the soul like a candle choked by doubt's breath. They stood before a sealed sanctum, the chamber where a Primarch once prayed, not to gods, but to a father who pretended not to hear. The one they guarded lay beyond, not dead, but drowning in a destiny too heavy even for engineered divinity. And when the presence inside called, not with command but with plea, the guard broke. One voice, cracked with grief, raw with fear, rose from within the chamber, not a war cry, just a whisper. "Brother, help me," an impossible word. A forbidden bond. The guard did not move, they could not. Their every cell screamed duty, loyalty, eternal purpose. But their hearts, those beaten relics of humanity sealed beneath ceramite and ritual, shivered. For the first time, duty felt like cruelty. For the first time, loyalty tasted like abandonment. The door shook, not from force but despair. A fist struck it from inside with the strength to level mountains, yet the impact sounded small, fragile like knuckles rapping on a coffin lid. And the guard, those statues of purity, those monuments of obedience, stood frozen, unable to save the one they loved, unable to disobey the one they worshipped. And so the Primarch inside broke, alone, while the warriors sworn to die for him did nothing but listen to a godchild drown in grief. In that corridor, loyalty became betrayal, quiet, clean, and merciless. Later, when the door finally opened, when silence replaced pleading, the Primarch emerged not uplifted by prayer or fire, but hollow, eyes dim as dying suns. He looked at them not with anger, not with accusation, but with the cold clarity of someone who has seen love tested and found it wanting. And in that moment, they understood the horror. They had obeyed perfectly, and in doing so, they had failed utterly. A crack spidered through the soul of the Imperium, unseen, unheard, but lethal. For from that moment, a truth haunted them like a phantom marching in perfect step. Sometimes duty kills more surely than any blade. That day was never recorded. It was never sung by choirs nor carved into shrine walls. It lived only in the hearts of giants who could never confess it, and in the tremor that sometimes touched their stance when they remembered the sound of a god begging like a child. And somewhere in the golden corridors of eternity, the Emperor felt it not as anger but as grief sharpened into prophecy. A guard had not fallen, a guard had obeyed, and that was the tragedy. For empires do not collapse when loyalty breaks, they collapse when loyalty becomes indistinguishable from cruelty. A shield can fail not by shattering, but by standing still. There are sins that echo louder than war, louder than planets dying, louder even than gods screaming in the warp, and the first sin of steel drawn against steel among the Emperor's chosen was such a wound upon creation. It did not happen in a storm of bolt or fire or beneath banners soaked in blood. It happened in solemn quiet, in a sanctum where honor was meant to be eternal and loyalty unbreakable. Two honor guard brothers in oath, statues carved from the same unyielding devotion, stood vigil over a relic of their Primarch's legacy, a chamber where his breath once shaped fate and his shadow alone could silence armies. Their armor, etched in dogma and virtue, gleamed beneath sacred luminescent braziers, each plate a scripture, each seal a promise. Yet beneath that perfection, something unseen trembled, doubt shaped like memory, longing shaped like pain. For one, the memory of the Primarch's plea still bled like an open wound, a voice echoing not in his ears but in the marrow of his engineered bones. For the other, faith remained absolute, untouched by sorrow, weaponized into something brutal and blind. And when the first whispered, barely more than breath, "We failed him," the sanctum froze. Not in sound, silence had always lived there, but in truth, raw and forbidden, now spoken aloud like heresy. The other turned slowly, as if disbelief weighed upon his helm like gravity. "We obeyed," he replied, voice chiseled from devotion, hard and cold as a tomb. "Obedience is not failure." Yet the first stepped forward, gauntlets trembling not from fear but from truth trying to escape centuries of conditioning. If obedience breaks him, then what are we? Shields, or executioners wearing loyalty's mask? That question was a blade sharper than any forged by Mechanicum smiths. It cut deeper than adamantium could. The other felt something crack, not in faith, but in patience. For in the Imperium, doubt is contagion, mercy is corrosion, and sympathy is rot. And so, with a voice like a grave sealing shut, he answered, "We are loyal." And loyalty does not question. The first guard's hand drifted, not to weapon, not yet, but to his chest, as though searching for a heartbeat beneath ceramite that had forgotten how to hold one. Then what remains of us if we cannot bleed for him, if we cannot think, if we cannot feel? The other stepped forward, and with each step righteousness fused with cruelty until they were indistinguishable. Feeling is weakness. Thought is temptation, we are his will incarnate. Silence, the kind that comes before thunder. Then, I am still his son. Those words, blasphemy in their purity, treason in their love, left the first guard's lips like a confession carved from his soul. The oath seals on their armor flickered as if recoiling, machine spirits keened. The chamber's holy sensors hissed warnings, psychic wards rippled like disturbed water, and slowly, inevitability unfolded its wings. The loyal one, no, the rigid one, the blind one, drew his blade, each inch of steel singing the hymn of duty sharpened to lethal clarity. Not rage, not hatred, only duty. The first guard looked down at the weapon pointed at his heart and felt an agony no battlefield had ever gifted him. To him, his brother was not a threat. He was home, memory, the only witness to centuries of silent vigil. "Do you truly believe," he whispered, voice shaking with pain deeper than any wound, "that he would want us hollow?" The blade trembled, not with mercy but calculation, faith girding itself like armor. Want does not matter. Purpose does, and with that the world cracked, steel rose. The first guard's hand moved, not in defense, but in instinct, sorrow, desperation, and suddenly blades kissed, sparks blooming like dying stars between them. The clash was not loud, it was a whisper of apocalypse, a quiet shattering of eternity. For when perfection fights itself, when loyalty turns upon loyalty, when devotion becomes a weapon against love, empires fall. The fight did not last long. Trained reflexes moved like scripture made flesh, each motion a prayer of violence, each strike an argument carved into armor. They did not roar, they did not curse. They moved like grieving angels, one fighting to preserve obedience, the other fighting to preserve soul. And when at last there was silence, true silence, the first guard stood over his brother, blade dripping not blood but oil and sacred lubrication that gleamed like tears. His breath shuddered, his heart, yes, he had one, felt like it was breaking across centuries. Before any mortal tongue spoke of chaos, before cults carved runes into their flesh, before heresy became a tide, there were eyes in the dark, watching, waiting, hungering for cracks in the armor of gods. And when the first honor guard struck down his brother, when the sacred silence of duty was shattered by sorrow and steel, the warp did not roar in triumph, it exhaled. Soft, delighted, patient, like a predator that has just scented weakness in the herd it has stalked for millennia. In the infinite madness beyond reality's veil, something ancient stirred, its presence not seen but felt, like the cold breath of the grave sliding across the back of a neck. It did not speak in words, it spoke in longing, in temptation woven from mourning and purpose. A whisper slithered through a place that had never known sound, brushing against the soul of the warrior who had loved too fiercely to obey. "You bleed for loyalty, bleed instead for truth." The guard shuddered, helm lowering toward the fallen brother at his feet, hands trembling, not from fear of punishment, but from grief so heavy it felt like gravity crushing armor and bone alike. He spoke nothing aloud, his lips did not move, but his soul answered, raw and quivering like a wound exposed to freezing air. "Why must loyalty taste like death?" And the warp answered with silence that felt like understanding. Because it did not need to speak. Grief is a language it knows better than gods. Around him, the sanctum remained still, statues looming like judgment frozen in stone, braziers flickering with holy flame that suddenly seemed far too small to banish the truth pressing at the edges of existence. For the first time, the honor guard felt something he was never forged to feel. He was being watched not by the emperor, but by something else. It did not offer corruption. Temptation is far stronger when it comes disguised as comfort. It did not promise glory, only release, not from duty, but from its cruelty. He stumbled, gauntlet rasping against marble, breath ragged inside a suit that suddenly felt like a coffin of gold and oath seals. They call us perfect, he thought, but perfection cannot feel, and yet here I am broken by love. In the warp, laughter rippled, not mocking but pleased. For the first time since humanity tore itself from the cradle, a perfect soldier had cracked not from ambition or pride, but from care. And care, whispered the void, is the most dangerous rebellion of all. He tried to pray, but the words tasted like ash. He tried to stand tall, but duty no longer felt holy, it felt heavy. He looked at the body of his brother, and the world blurred around him, holy gold bleeding into trembling shadow. He spoke, voice hoarse as if aging centuries in a breath, "Forgive me. I cannot serve and forget." And somewhere, faint but clear, the warp purred, "Then remember, we always remember." A tremor raced through him, not corruption, not madness, awareness. The truth that perfection demanded blindness, and he had chosen sight. The truth that loyalty without heart is chains, and he had broken one link. The truth that the emperor forged guardians to stand against gods, yet in doing so, he blindfolded them to their own souls. The honor guard lifted his fallen brother in arms meant to carry only war, and the armor groaned like mourning steel. He walked, not fleeing, not rebelling, but seeking breath in a world that demanded he never breathe at all. Behind him the whisper faded, satisfied but patient. For chaos does not always come as fire. Sometimes it comes as mercy where mercy should not exist. And as the sanctum doors sealed behind him, the warp murmured with a glare too quiet for any star to hear. A heart awakened is harder to kill than any god. The first corruption was not hate, it was compassion. There are storms made of fire and storms made of silence, and it is the silent ones that end empires. When word drifted like poisoned incense through the psychic arteries of the Imperium, reaching the one who sat upon a throne not yet gilded in eternal torment, the Emperor did not roar. He did not summon lightning, nor split planets, nor burn the names of traitors from existence. Instead, he sat still, and in that stillness galaxies trembled. His wrath was not the kind that lashes outward. It collapsed inward, crushing the divine heart that had dared to believe he could sculpt perfection without sacrificing humanity. For he remembered, oh yes, he remembered, his sons weeping in sterile cradles of steel, begging for a father's touch he refused to give. He remembered worlds pacified in his name, not through love but unyielding decree. He remembered every moment he taught loyalty by extinguishing mercy. And now, one of his most perfect creations had proven the flaw in his design simply by caring. The Emperor's fingers tightened on the armrests of his throne until gold dented like flesh. His voice did not thunder through the warp, it cracked like porcelain under unbearable truth. He loved. It was both accusation and mourning. His custodians, those who watched him with eyes forged to understand nothing but command, felt a ripple of something they were never meant to perceive, disappointment not in the guard who faltered, but in himself. He could not allow this to be spoken, could not let the galaxy see divinity hesitate. Yet he also could not condemn the warrior who had bled for loyalty and shattered under devotion. To punish him would be to confess the Imperium's greatest sin, that in the pursuit of obedience it had murdered the very soul it sought to protect. And so there would be no trial, no proclamation, no execution. The Emperor issued his decree in a voice that sounded like it had walked through sorrow and returned stained with eternity. He is not to be hunted. The custodians lowered their halberds in confusion. No guilt meant no pursuit, yet the weight of judgment still hung thick as incense before a funeral pyre. The Emperor's gaze drifted not toward victory, nor faith, nor destiny, but toward memory, not of glory, but of regret. He is to be forgotten, that was the sentence. Oblivion, not death, silence, not chains, a judgment crueler than fire, kinder than execution. Because to acknowledge his crime was to acknowledge the wound at the heart of the Imperium. That love and loyalty had never been meant to coexist. In the archives, a name was erased with the cold precision of a scalpel. Statues that had once stood eternal were quietly dismantled in midnight shadows. Services held in his honor were rewritten as ceremonies for a hero who never lived. To the Imperium's machine memory, he became a ghost without birth. To the warriors who served beside him, a story spoken only in breaths and tremors. Yet the Emperor could not erase the echo of the guard's last words from his mind, "I remember what love is." And in some hidden chamber of his impossible soul, it struck him like a blade forged not of steel, but truth. For he remembered 2 friends lost, brothers shattered, a dream of humanity that once held warmth and now bled nothing but iron. The throne around him groaned as if bearing not just power, but guilt. And in the infinite quiet that followed his decree, he whispered a confession that no ear would ever hear. "I did not build soldiers, I built sons." The first exile of the Imperium was not cast out for treason, but for feeling what a god no longer dared to. He walked into a galaxy carved from duty and drenched in prophecy, yet not a single world had been made for him. He had been forged to stand at the right hand of gods, not wander like a wounded pilgrim through mortal dust. But exile is not always chains, and exile is not always death. Sometimes it is simply being allowed to live where one was never meant to breathe. His armor, once a cathedral of shining loyalty, now felt like a tombstone he wore upon his own flesh. The heraldry had been scraped, the sigils burned away in ceremony so quiet even angels would have missed its passing. What remained was not disgrace. Disgrace requires witnesses. What remained was emptiness, and emptiness has teeth. Stars drifted above him like cold, indifferent gods, and war banners flapped across half-lit skies of conquered worlds. Yet he moved like a shadow among those who could never know what he had been, what he had lost, what he had dared to feel. He walked through hive cities choking on incense and industrial ash, through shrines that stank of burned prayers, through battlefields still steaming with the blood of soldiers who screamed their devotion into uncaring skies. Everywhere duty. Everywhere sacrifice, but nowhere mercy, nowhere memory. He was not hunted, not by decree, but absence is a hunt of its own. No brother called to him, no command reached him, no anthem welcomed him home. The universe did not condemn him, it simply forgot him. And somehow that hurt more than execution ever could have. On one world he passed through, he watched a regiment of terrified humans kneel before a commissar, swearing loyalty with cracked voices. Behind them, a boy no more than 17 trembled, whispering a name, his mother's perhaps, or a saint's, or simply fear wearing human shape. The commissar pressed a bolt pistol to the boy's head, not because he faltered, but because his fear was visible. And fear in the Imperium is treated like plague. The exiled guard's gauntlet flexed, an impulse flaring like heat through dead coals. He had seen this ceremony 1,000 times from behind golden helmets and sacred silence. He had believed it necessary, he had believed it righteous, but now it felt like watching himself kill the boy with every breath he didn't take to intervene. The bolt cracked, a red blossom staining stone, and the regiment rose in perfect obedience. The guard did not move, his heart, yes, it still beat, felt like iron melting slow beneath shame's fire. He walked on. Sometimes he found himself staring up at statues of primarchs carved into mountain faces, their heroic visages cast in eternal light. Once he reached out, fingers brushing carved marble cheek, hoping for warmth, for recognition, for anything but stone. But love, once betrayed, turns even gods to statues. In dreams he heard the plea again, "Brother, help me," and woke with his chest aching as if that plea had been carved into his ribcage. He wondered if exile was not punishment at all, but reminder that the Imperium had traded its heart for its throne, and he had dared to feel the absence. He wondered if the Emperor in some place beyond sight also walked in regret. He wondered if statues wept when no worshipper watched. He wondered dangerous thing, wondering. It leads to truth. It leads to rebellion. It leads to humanity. And in the cold void between stars, when his ship drifted through silence thick as mourning cloth, he spoke not to gods nor duty, but to the brother he had slain. I remember. And remembering hurts. In response, the universe offered nothing. Yet in that nothing, something stirred, a fragile beginning, a quiet seed of a thought never allowed to bloom before. If the Imperium demanded he feel nothing, then every heartbeat he carried was rebellion. He had lost his place in the Imperium, but gained something far more dangerous himself. Legends in the Imperium do not begin with trumpets. They begin as rumors, thin as incense smoke, trembling on the edge of forbidden truth. And so it was with him, the nameless guard who walked among mortals with a heart that refused to die. First it was a murmur in a trench-world mess hall, where soldiers gnawed ration bricks with cracked teeth and prayed to be forgotten by the next bombardment. There is a giant who wanders the war fronts, one whispered, eyes glinting with fear and hope. Not a space marine, no heraldry, no chapter's mark, but his armor sings like morning steel. Others scoffed because soldiers scoff at miracles. They must, else longing devours them faster than lasfire. Yet the rumor spread, crawling through vox channels and dying throats, slipping into cathedrals where priests bled their voices raw, echoing in manufactorums where children coughed ash and called it air. Someone claimed they saw him push aside rubble barehanded to free a trapped guardsman, no praise sought, no words spoken, disappearing before thanks could stain the moment. Someone else swore he stood alone against a tyrannid beast, a titan of claws and hunger, not as a hero but as a wall, silent, bleak, unyielding, until the creature lay broken and he walked away without looking back. And always, witnesses insisted there was a grief around him like fog, a sorrow so vast it felt sacred. Some called him the Emperor's lost sword, others called him an angel of regret. But the most dangerous whispered he was proof that beneath ceramite and creed, even perfection can ache. High lords dismissed the talk as battlefield hysteria. Inquisitors hunted the rumor like plague, for nothing threatens an empire built on fear more than the possibility of compassion wearing the armor of its gods. And yet they did not find him, not because he fled, but because he did not seek to be seen. He simply walked. The Imperium is infinite suffering and endless war, and he moved through it like a ghost mourning the house it once owned. On a plague world, he carried a coughing child to safety through streets slick with death, laying her before a Medici tent before vanishing like mist. On a shrine moon, he knelt before a statue of a Primarch head bowed, not in worship but apology. On a mining asteroid, he dragged a collapsing support beam upright to save hundreds, then sank to one knee, exhausted, not physically, for his body was a cathedral of engineered might, but spiritually, as if every life he saved weighed as heavily as everyone he failed. And each act became story, story became rumor, rumor became fear, because hope in the Imperium is heresy. Hope breeds questions. Hope asks why the Emperor needed perfect soldiers if perfection breaks at the touch of love. Hope wonders if gods can grieve. In the halls of Terra, whispers slithered even through marble meant to silence rebellion. A custodian paused before a sealed archive, feeling, just for a breath, a flicker of doubt, a memory of comrades lost, of oaths forged in warmth before they were sharpened into blades. He dismissed it, but the tremble in his gauntlet remained. A sister of battle heard a soldier's dying prayer not to be brave, but to be held, and for the briefest, blasphemous moment she wondered if devotion without tenderness is devotion at all. Even a tech priest, those hollowed by metal and logic, claimed a machine spirit wept oil when his name, lost and forbidden, brushed the data stream like a ghost's finger. Whispers spread not like fire, fire is loud and bright, but like rot, quiet, patient, inevitable. And at the edge of every tale, the same sentence lingered, breathed like confession and warning both. He remembers, and the galaxy trembled, not because one warrior had lost his place, but because a forgotten truth had begun to breathe again. That strength without sorrow is tyranny, and faith without heart is hollow. And so the Imperium tried to silence a rumor, but rumors are only dangerous when they are true. The Inquisition does not arrive like thunder. It arrives like inevitability, quiet boots on holy stone, parchment seals still wet with wax made from the fat of martyrs, and eyes colder than the vacuum between dying stars. When they came for him, there was no proclamation, no warning flare in the void, no righteous chorus echoing from cathedral cannons. They appeared on a barren moon where trenches cut the ground like scars across a corpse, where soldiers slept sitting upright because fear has sharper teeth than exhaustion. The air smelled of blood, oil, and prayers that had given up becoming miracles. He stood alone on the ashen ridge, silhouette carved against a sky swollen with smoke and distant fire, a silent monument, a lost sun. A relic of loyalty too pure to survive the Imperium's truth. And the robed figures approached, inquisitorial stormtroopers in armor blacker than the memory of mercy, purity seals fluttering like funeral ribbons, helms adorned with vox skulls that whispered threat litanies. At their center walked the Inquisitor herself, a woman whose presence felt like the absence of hope made flesh. Her eyes bore the weight of a lifetime spent drowning worlds to save them, and yet something flickered there. Hesitation, curiosity, perhaps even pity, though she would rather die than name it. She spoke without volume, yet her voice carried like judgment etched onto bone. You do not belong, not accusation, statement. The guard said nothing. What words did he still possess? He held no name, no rank, no place in the stars. He was neither traitor nor loyalist, neither angel nor exile, just a man who remembered too much to remain a weapon. The stormtroopers leveled their rifles, servo muscles hissing like serpents waking. Not fear, protocol. In the Imperium, every unknown is heresy until proven otherwise, and compassion is the most dangerous unknown of all. The guard did not reach for his blade. He did not raise his fists. He simply looked at them, and in his gaze lay centuries of silent vigil, love buried under steel, guilt carved into flesh, a wound shaped like loyalty. The Inquisitor lifted a finger, not to command fire, but to study. She had hunted psychers that screamed galaxies into madness, warped monstrosities dripping with damnation, traitors who carved gods from their own agony. Yet here she faced something far more terrifying, a loyal heart that had survived obedience. "Tell me your sin," she demanded, an edge in her voice forged from fear sharpened into duty. Slowly, painfully, as though every word weighed like a dying star on his tongue, he spoke for the first time in years. "I loved." The stormtroopers tensed. No demon's roar is more blasphemous to the Imperium. The Inquisitor's breath caught, not because the answer shocked her, but because she remembered once loving, too, before the galaxy taught her that survival demanded steel, not tenderness. "Love is not our creed," she whispered, more to herself than him. "Duty is." He bowed his head. "Duty brought me to him. Love made me stay." Silence stretched, thick, suffocating, and then she did something unexpected. She lowered her hand, the barrels dipped, the air loosened, if only by a breath. "You are not corrupted," she murmured, "not by warp, but by memory." She stepped closer, and in her eyes flickered a war. Doctrine versus humanity, oath versus truth, the cold machine of the Imperium battling the fragile creature inside her ribcage. "I should kill you," she said. "I should erase you," as he ordered. His answer was not defiance nor plea, but quiet acceptance. "Then let it be mercy." That broke her. Mercy. A word forbidden, forgotten, dangerous. She saw in him not a rebel, not a weapon, but a mirror, the reflection of what the Imperium once dared to dream before fear turned it monstrous. And so she stepped aside, not as forgiveness, not as rebellion, but as mourning. "Go." The order trembled, fragile as a cracked rosary bead. "Before I remember what I am." He nodded once, solemn, grateful, infinitely weary, and walked past her, each footfall sounding like the ghost of a prayer. She did not turn to watch him vanish into ash wind. Instead, she whispered to the empty sky, voice shaking like a hymn sung by a dying choir. "Emperor, forgive me," I remembered. When the Inquisition chooses mercy, the Imperium is already cracking. He did not seek followers. He was not crusading, not proclaiming revelation, not calling for rebellion beneath banners stitched with grief. He only walked, burdened by memory and the quiet ache of a heart that refused to die. Yet some wounds do not bleed alone. Pain recognizes kin, sorrow calls to sorrow, and in a galaxy built on fear, the rare spark of compassion burns like a star seen from the depths of a tomb. The first to find him was a guardsman, half-starved, limping, his regiment annihilated by a war they were never meant to survive. He saw the silent giant standing among shattered ruins and whispered through cracked lips, "I don't want to die afraid." The exiled honor guard lifted him, not as a commander lifts a soldier, but as a brother lifts a fallen sibling, and carried him to safety. No blessing was spoken, no doctrine preached, but the act itself was a sermon older than empire, care in a land that worshipped cruelty. Word spread not as strategy, but as instinct. Soon a sister of the order Pronatus sought him, not armored for war, but cloaked in doubt. She knelt not in worship, but exhaustion, her eyes haunted by the screams of relics begging for salvation as they burned in her arms in the name of purity. She did not ask for answers. She simply sat beside him, placing her rosary in his gauntleted hand, as if saying, "If you carry memory, let me share its weight." Others followed, an Astra Militarum medic who had lost every patient but still whispered comfort to corpses. A tech priest who had once heard machine spirits weep and could no longer pretend they did not feel. Even a ragged psyker child too exhausted to be afraid, clutching his leg as if he were sanctuary carved into flesh and gold. They did not resemble a force. They were fracture made flesh, hopeful, haunted, bleeding pieces of humanity, gathering around the only being in the Imperium permitted to feel and survive it. They traveled like shadows through broken worlds, not to wage war, but to witness it, to save those who could be saved, to remember those who couldn't. And slowly, inevitably, each one whispered the same forbidden truth. I couldn't be what they wanted. He never blamed them. He simply walked, and they walked with him, bound not by command, but by brokenness. A relictor's Astartes joined, a warrior tattooed with guilt, who had touched demon artifacts in desperate pursuit of victory and found only emptiness. He removed his chapter icon in silent penance and stood beside the exiled guard like a statue ashamed of its own shadow. They never saluted, they never swore oaths. Oaths had ruined them all. Instead they shared silence, the rare, sacred kind where wounds breathe rather than rot. And that silence changed shape. It became not emptiness but refuge, not defeat but pilgrimage. Yet the galaxy does not permit sanctuary. Never has, never will. Whispers now spread not only among the broken, but among the powerful. The High Lords heard of an unnamed figure gathering strays, deserters, doubters, not by force but by compassion. They called it a sickness. Chaplains called it a toxin. Commissars called it a myth that needed a bullet, but myths are bullets too, aimed not at bodies but at ideas. And this myth carried something heretical, dangerous, contagious. The idea that loyalty without cruelty might still be loyalty. In hushed corners of warships and trenches, soldiers who had never dared question anything now whispered to one another. If even one of them felt, "Why can't we?" Hope cracked open skulls faster than any demon. The exiled guard saw the danger. Every soul who followed him was now a candle in a windstorm, and the Imperium hates candles. It prefers darkness it can control. He should have sent them away. He should have walked alone. But when he looked at them, scarred hands, trembling prayers, tired eyes refusing to close forever, he realized a truth he had never been allowed. Love may damn a man, but loneliness destroys him. So he let them stay, not as soldiers, not as acolytes, as witnesses, as proof, as hearts the Imperium failed to kill. And somewhere deep in the warp, something ancient leaned closer, not hungry this time, but curious. For even chaos had forgotten there was a form of rebellion purer than hate, grief turned into grace. They did not follow him to rise against the Imperium. They followed him because he refused to let humanity die quietly. There comes a moment in every empire built on obedience where mercy becomes the greatest heresy, and the Imperium, monolithic, wounded, terrified of its own shadow, reached that moment when his name, though erased, began to beat again like a forgotten heart under marble. They could endure traitors, for traitors bleed faith that can be burned out. They could endure demons, for demons are monsters and monsters make martyrs. They could even endure apathy, for numb soldiers still march. But a fallen guardian carrying humanity like a flame cupped in shaking hands, that was contagion, that was prophecy, that was a crack in the golden mask. The high lords whispered in chambers colder than void steel. The Inquisition argued in voices sharp enough to cut star charts. Chaplains pounded their crozius against altar stone until sparks flared like dying suns. They all reached the same conclusion, not with triumph but dread. If one perfect son remembers love, others may follow. And so the declaration came, not shouted, not broadcast, but carved in purity seals and sealed with blood drawn from priests who feared they had forgotten how to pray. By order of the throne, the unnamed one shall be hunted unto extinction, for compassion is the first blade of treachery. Such irony, compassion named as rebellion in a realm supposedly built to save mankind. Orders pulsed through vox relays, burning across sectors faster than plague wind, kill squads mobilized. Astartes chaplains prayed litanies of hatred, each syllable a desperate attempt to drown doubt in dogma. Even custodians hesitated before accepting, for deep within them flickered the faintest echo, a memory of a brother who once stood among them, golden and proud, before sorrow carved him into gentler shape. He felt the decree before he heard it, not psychic but emotional, a pressure like the universe inhaling before it screams. Birds scattered, ash swirled in uneasy spirals, the sky itself seemed to hold breath. His companions noticed first, the medic clutching her bandages tighter, the psyker child pressing trembling fingers to his temples as if warding off a storm, the sister lifting her rosary like a weapon against fate. The exiled guard only bowed his head, not in fear, not in anger, in mourning. He had known this day would come, not because he challenged the Imperium, but because he reminded it of what it once promised to be. And empires do not forgive memory. He spoke then, voice like broken sanctum stones softened by candle wax warmth. You owe me nothing, leave, let me bear this alone. But the broken do not abandon the broken. The guardsman who once begged not to die afraid shook his head, tears mixing with battlefield grime. I will not leave the only man who made me feel human. The sister rose, armor creaking like prayer-worn pews, eyes defiant through sorrow. If faith cannot live beside kindness, then faith is hollow. Even the tech priest, wired into cold machine logic, placed a metal hand on the guard's arm, wordless, trembling, an act worth 1,000 hymns. The relictor veteran simply unsheathed his blade, its surface whispering regret, and spoke one vow: we stand. He did not thank them, some emotions are too sacred for language. Instead, he looked to the burning horizon, where gunships gathered like carrion birds circling a wounded god, and grief settled on his shoulders like ancient armor. They will call you traitors, he warned. Then let them learn what loyalty feels like, the sister answered, voice steady with a fury born from tenderness betrayed. He almost smiled, and lifted his massive shield, not as symbol of war but of shelter. The first inquisitorial dreadnought thundered into view, ceramite teeth bared, purity seals whipping like flayed skin. Over the vox came a chant, cold, ritualistic, terrified of what it sought to kill. Purge the heresy of mercy, and that was when he finally understood, not that the Imperium feared him, but that it feared the idea of him, a warrior who remembered love, a guardian who protected without demand. A relic of what humanity was meant to be. So he braced, sorrow in every tendon and hope in every fracture, and whispered a blessing not against enemies, but for those who would kill him because they knew no other path. May you one day feel without breaking. The earth trembled as the first shot fell, a roar like a god choking on its own creed, and he raised his shield not to fight, but to protect a hope so fragile even angels feared to touch it. They did not hunt him because he turned from the Imperium, they hunted him because he reminded it of its soul. War did not arrive like a righteous storm, it crawled forward like guilt given flesh and steel, armored in doctrine and blind devotion, a cathedral of death grinding across the battlefield on adamantine treads. The sky split open with the scream of drop pods and burning thrusters, imperial banners cutting through smoke like holy knives searching for sin to carve from living bone. The first salvos hit before voices could finish prayers. Artillery shells roared like dying angels hurled from heaven, earth shattering into fountains of dirt and gore, trenches collapsing as if the planet itself flinched at what was coming. The exiled honor guard did not break formation. He stood at the front, shield lifted, posture carved, not heroic but resigned, like a father bracing against a storm to protect children who still believed tomorrow existed. Bolter rounds hammered his shield in a relentless hymn of iron, sparks feathering off its surface like dying wings, each impact cracking stone beneath his boots. Behind him, the small flock he never asked for steadied themselves, breath trembling but spines unbent, because fear is allowed when hope exists, and he had given them that forbidden fruit. The sister of battle whispered a prayer not for victory, but for courage. The guardsman loaded his battered lasgun with shaking fingers, whispering to himself the name of the first friend he lost. The psyker child cried without sound, power flickering like a candle in a hurricane. And over them screamed imperial gunships, purity seals whipping, vox gasters chanting sermons soaked in hate masquerading as holiness. Purge the memory, purge the weakness, the Imperium does not bleed for love. Then came the first wave, Astartes, sons of a dream long since drowned, ceramite black as funeral stone, chapter sigils etched in cruelty where honor once lived. They moved like judgment incarnate, bolter fire chewing the world apart, chanting litanies that sounded less like faith and more like denial carved into sound. The exiled guard stepped forward, meeting them not as enemy, but as brother in spirit and stranger in truth. His voice, when it finally rose, was a bell tolling over graves, hold, and his warband did. Not because he commanded, because they trusted. The first Astartes struck like a meteor wrapped in armor and purpose, but when his chainsword screamed through the air toward the child, the exiled guard moved with speed that felt like tragedy sharpened into instinct. His shield intercepted the strike, sparks flaring between them like tears caught in light. The Astartes stared into his helm and saw not rebellion but grief, and that hesitation, that single heartbeat of doubt, cost him. The honor guard's blade did not roar, it whispered, sliding between armor plates with elegance born not of rage but sorrow, and the giant fell not as a traitor, but as a son killed by truth too heavy to share. The others roared, confusion twisting into fury, their faith cracking like stained glass struck by hammers made of reality. They attacked in a storm, but the exiled guard moved like a psalm torn in half, parrying without cruelty, striking without hate, a dancer in armor, a ghost of devotion fighting not to kill, but to spare, even as he spilled their blood. Around him, his followers fought not as zealots, but as survivors. The medic dragged a wounded soldier behind cover. The sister blocked bolter trails with a shield made of her own body. The psyker screamed starlight and sorrow into existence, bursting helmets with fear alone as tears streamed down his face. And through it all, the exiled warrior whispered again and again, as though begging the universe to hear him, "I do not want to fight you, but empires do not listen. Empires only consume." The Astartes rallied, chanting louder, drowning their doubt in fury, but doubt once born does not die easily. One hesitated, seeing mercy in his enemy's eyes, and that moment stretched across eternity. "What are you?" he rasped. And the forgotten son, drenched in blood he did not want to spill, answered with a truth heavier than war, "What you were meant to become." Then came the dreadnought strike, a thunderous blow that split rock and shattered ground, hurling the guard back in a shockwave that sounded like a god grieving. As he rose, battered but unbroken, his followers forming a trembling shield around him, he realized the truth carved into every fallen brother's face. They were not fighting out of hate, but out of fear that if he was right, their entire world was wrong. And so the battle raged not between soldiers and traitor, but between memory and doctrine, between love and survival, between a single heart and a machine built to crush hearts beneath gold. In the end, as fire turned sky to furnace and bolter smoke choked hope like a noose, he stood unmoving, shield raised, not a warrior triumphant, but a monument to what the Imperium forgot. That strength without compassion is just another word for terror. The Imperium saw a heretic that day, but those who survived whispered a different word, human. Far across the galaxy, enthroned, entombed, unbreathing yet infinite, the Emperor felt it. Not through reports, not through sensors or psychic wards, but through the wound in creation where his perfection cracked and something unbearably fragile leaked through, mercy. It hit him not like a blade, but like memory, old, painful, impossible. In that moment, as bolter rounds tore soil and suns spilled blood defending a lie too sacred to question, the Emperor felt a tremor ripple through the psychic ocean. Not warp bane, not demon boil, love. A single flicker of it, born from a forgotten warrior's heart, traveled like a tremulous heartbeat across the psychic void and brushed his vast, eternal awareness like the hand of a child pressing palm to a closed door. The Emperor did not roar, he did not smite, he remembered. For just one aching instant, the god of mankind did not see the golden throne, the legends, the corpse empires carved by fear. He saw a workshop on Terra lit by candlelight, where he once shaped humanity with hands that still trembled from hope rather than burden. He saw sons laughing before they learned war, unity before it tasted ash, a dream before it calcified into doctrine. And beneath that avalanche of ancient promise, he felt, truly felt, the pain of a single soul who loved him enough to break under devotion. The custodians guarding his sacred hall felt him stir, not in anger, but in grief so vast it whispered like galaxies collapsing. For a moment, even the golden throne sighed, gears groaning as if grieving with their prisoner. The Emperor, father of legions, architect of fate, closed his unseen eyes and the universe around him dimmed. Echoes of the battle reached him like tears falling into an ocean of screams. He felt the fear of the Astartes forced to kill a brother who reminded them of innocence they never had. He felt the trembling devotion of the mortals who stood beside the exile, not for glory, but because someone finally let them be human. He felt compassion in armor clashing with duty in bone, felt the cruel beauty of soldiers praying for forgiveness even as they fired. And in that torrent of clashing belief, the Emperor whispered, not a command, but a question buried beneath eons of silence. Am I wrong? The warp shuddered. Silence answered, not because the galaxy did not hear, but because the galaxy did not know how to respond to a god who doubted himself. He tried to brace against it, tried to drown memory beneath necessity, tried to be the weapon humanity demanded rather than the father it once needed. But truth is a thin, stubborn blade. It slides under armor where fire cannot burn. He remembered the Primarchs, each a fragment of him torn and scattered by hands unseen. He remembered their sorrow, their longing, their flawed, magnificent hearts, and he realized with a pang sharper than any traitor's blade. He never intended to build perfect soldiers. He wanted sons. It was the Imperium that demanded machines. Across the battlefield, the exiled guard lifted his shield again, staggering beneath the weight of enemies who thought they fought for righteousness but bled because they feared tenderness. And the Emperor, immobile, imprisoned by the throne built to save humanity, felt something he had not felt since the age before war carved his face into eternal stone. He wished to stand beside one of his children, but he could not. Not by will, not by power, not by longing. The throne held him like guilt holds a conscience. And so he did the only thing he could. He reached, if only a fraction, if only a flicker, if only a breath. A faint warmth touched the exiled warrior's soul, a whisper that did not speak words but wrapped around him like a memory of sunlight lost to 10,000 years of shadow. The guard faltered, not in weakness but in awe. For in that heartbeat he felt what every loyal son once felt before destiny hardened their hearts. He was seen, not erased, not forgotten, seen. But the Emperor's touch was not blessing nor command, it was apology. And as the connection faded, drowned by wars and prayers and the machinery of the dying god throne, one truth remained in both their hearts. Somewhere along the way, humanity forgot what it was saving. The Emperor did not weep. He remembered what tears once meant. The warp does not hunger only for hatred. Hatred is crude fire, bright, brutal, short-lived. What chaos truly craves is emotion sharpened to unbearable beauty. Grief so deep it becomes devotion in reverse, hope so fragile it vibrates on the edge of collapse, love cracked open until its raw core shimmers like a wound made of light. And when the exiled honor guard stood beneath a sky burning with imperial fury, shields shaking, heart bleeding for those forced to kill in the name of purity, the warp stirred not like a predator, but like a lover stepping barefoot into a cathedral of sorrow. Something ancient leaned close, a presence not roaring but whispering with the intimacy of breath on skin. It had watched gods fall, watched empires kneel, watched faith rot into fanaticism, but this was rare. A guardian forged in perfection, now fractured by compassion. The Imperium never feared chaos, it feared this. And from the trembling edges of unreality, voices spilled like velvet knives dipped in honey and despair. Not the shrieking madness of demons, not the oily seduction of whispers promising dominion, no. This was gentler. Son of loyalty, crooned a voice softer than prayer yet colder than void. Even gods abandon their children. It was not threat, it was understanding. The guard staggered, not in body but soul, as if the air itself thickened into regret he had not earned yet could not set down. Around him, reality rippled like cloth caught in cosmic breath. Demonic whispers slithered not as chains but as comfort, the most dangerous form of corruption, the kind that approaches on its knees rather than its claws. "You break because you care," murmured Slanesh, voice silken and aching, offering not pleasure but release from pain. "Let us cradle what the Emperor cast aside." From the cold abyss drifted the chill of Tzinch, curiosity burning bright and hungry. "You seek meaning in ruin, let me show you what love becomes when it learns to reshape fate." Even Nurgle stirred, a gentle rot, fatherly in its twisted mercy. "Surrender grief, child. Let sorrow soften into acceptance." And from blood-soaked infinity came corn, not roaring but respectful, voice like a war drum slowed to funeral cadence. "You fight with honor, your pain is earned. Join not the tyrant who forbids you glory born of heart." The air bruised with temptation, but none of these were the deepest voice. Beneath all of them simmered another presence, vast, yawning, formless. The quiet hunger of chaos undivided, not promising, not seducing, waiting, not to devour him but to see if grief alone might open the door. The exiled warrior heard them all, their echoes threading around his thoughts like mourning veils. But he did not bow, did not roar, did not curse. He only whispered, voice cracked like a cathedral bell snapped mid-toll, "I do not hate him." The warp stilled. Even the demons hesitated, surprised, not by devotion, but by a truth chaos has always feared. Grief without surrender. He clutched his shield, knuckles grinding against ceramite. "I do not love what the Imperium became, but I loved him." The warp shivered, not in rage, but in fascination. For no god in its depths understood love that chooses suffering when liberation beckons. "So break," cooed the darkness, dripping velvet sympathy. "Break and be remade free." His breath shook. For a heartbeat, just one, he felt how beautiful surrender could be, to be held, to let go, to stop being the last man in the galaxy who remembers tenderness. Tears, real, burning, human, threatened behind his helmet. The Psyker child clung to his leg, sensing the pull. The sister placed a trembling hand on his arm, whispering a prayer not against chaos but for him. and in that fragile chorus of broken lives depending on him, he found anchor. "I will break," he whispered, voice no louder than a dying flame, "but I will break human." The warp recoiled, not defeated, but awed, for even chaos had forgotten there existed wounds that do not bleed into damnation. And somewhere in that eternal storm, a shadow with wings like torn starlight paused, not laughing, not mocking, simply watching, because the greatest lure chaos ever deployed had not failed. It had been refused for a reason even gods struggle to name: love without demand. And so the warp retreated, not gone, not silent, but waiting, reverent, curious. It knew this truth now: he was not a soldier of the Emperor, not a servant of chaos. He was a relic of a forgotten possibility, a heresy older than the galaxy, a soul choosing suffering not for power, not for salvation, but for love. Chaos did not tempt him with power, it tempted him with comfort. And still he chose to hurt. There are endings carved in fire, endings sung by triumph, endings drowned in blood and madness. But the rarest ending in all the galaxy is the quiet one, the kind whispered like a prayer swallowed before the lips can tremble, the kind that chooses pain over escape and duty over heaven, even when heaven is a lie and duty is a broken blade. When dawn finally crawled across that devastated world, gray, sick, and thin like a wounded animal dragging itself across the mud, there stood the last of the Imperial Honor Guard, not in glory but in ruin. His armor hung shattered, its once golden trim tarnished like a memory time tried to forget. His shield, cracked in 3 places, clung to his arm only through stubborn defiance. His blade, once a hymn to perfection, now flickered like a dying prayer. Around him lay silence, not peace, the heavy, sacred silence where sacrifice breathes but does not dare to speak its name. The Psyker child slept in his arms, exhausted beyond fear, fingertips still glowing faintly with psychic ash. The battle sister leaned against his shoulder, helm removed, lips stained with blood but curved, not in victory, but in the small miracle of survival. They were not triumphant, they were simply alive, and in this galaxy, that is a rebellion louder than any war cry. And across the horizon, the Imperium's banners once more unfurled, not as salvation, but as judgment wrapped in steel. Gunships descended like iron angels, purity seals fluttered like execution warrants, the weight of the Emperor's dogma pressed like a tomb lid on a world still warm with the blood of loyalty. The honor guard did not raise his blade. He simply stood, shoulders squared, offering no resistance and no plea. For what defense can truth make against faith turn to stone? The Inquisition regarded him not as traitor nor hero, but as a paradox too dangerous to leave breathing. Astartes of a loyal chapter arrived, helms impassive, bolters lowered not in mercy but ritual, for even they knew legends when they saw one, and legends are never killed casually. A robed inquisitor stepped forward, eyes cold as a cathedral made of knives. You aided heretics, you defied doctrine, you sheltered a psyker outside sanction. Every word fell like a coffin nail. The guard bowed his head only once, as warriors do when accepting the wound meant to end their song. "I served humanity," he answered, voice quiet, steady, unbearably human. Even when humanity forgot itself, a flicker of hesitation trembled through the assembled ranks, the kind that comes when truth briefly outruns fear. But the Inquisition knows no hesitation. The order was spoken like scripture. Purge the heretic, yet as bolts were raised, something unexpected happened. Not divine intervention, not rebel uprising, not demonic claw nor angelic blade. It was smaller, gentler, infinitely more dangerous. The child woke, gripped the honor guard's broken gauntlet, and whispered, trembling but unafraid, "He saved me." And in that moment, something ancient stirred in the hearts of soldiers who had forgotten they were once men. For the greatest heresy in the Imperium is not betrayal, it is compassion without permission. A single bolt round fired, but not at the warrior. Instead, it struck the ground beside him. A warning, a fracture in the machine. Someone had disobeyed. Someone remembered, the Inquisitor's fury ignited, but too late. The squad refused the kill order, helmets turning as one, not toward their supposed enemy, but toward their commander. In the grim darkness of the far future, rebellion does not roar. It begins as a whisper of conscience, and in that silent defiance, the honor guard finally understood. His suffering was not meaningless. It had planted a spark in a world built on ash. He did not flee, he did not kneel. He simply turned, gathered the wounded sister and the trembling child, and walked into the wasteland. Every step was agony, every breath a vow. Behind him, soldiers once sworn to unquestioning obedience watched with a reverence reserved for saints and fallen angels. None followed, but none stopped him. In the far future, there are no happy endings. But there are endings that matter. And so the last honor guard vanished into myth, not as a hero nor traitor, but as something rarer, the proof that in a universe choking on war, mercy is still a weapon sharper than any blade. They say he wanders still, shield cracked, heart unbroken, not protecting an emperor, but protecting hope itself.